I'm like, now we're all getting a cool.
Yep, the divers are all very.
We got like, my mom was so my mom was
enjoying all the like stuff that we had like a couple of cats. But like, yeah. Have you been?
No, we had
That one, I think it was even sunrise, like when I worked about
and she got it from what he was like,
and I saw one.
It's right near like running stuff out.
I know exactly how I figured, but I'm not sure why, but I don't know.
I know how.
Starting my phone up to your
That's like, what did I want to do? I haven't done it yet.
I'm like, kill me. Yeah. I can still get to
That's the best way to, that's the best way to get abroad. I first went abroad, I went to
That's my hair look. I got it at the thrift store. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi. What up, peeps? Hello. Hello, and welcome. For those of you still waiting for a drink in the back, don't worry, I'm going to stall for time. Thank you guys so much for being here. Is this anybody's first time? Raise your hand. You can chime in the comments if you're online. Oh, okay, Anthony, that's a lie. Thank you. For those of you that are new, welcome. I hope you have a good time tonight and come back and fill out your punch card. The punch card is a shameless marketing ploy to get you to learn more about your own city. Yay! The prize is knowledge, but also art. I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate for all of you here in person. Thank you for being vaccinated. Give yourselves a round of applause. We're a history organization, so we understand the reason we don't have polio is because of vaccines. So bring them on. The more vaccines, the better over here. If you're watching from online and you haven't been vaccinated yet, now's the time. It's fun. Barely even hurts. Yeah, we're live streaming this. We've been live streaming all of our lectures this year. It's been pretty great because it gives us an opportunity to reach more people and cram more people into our knowledge circle than just doing it in person. But as somebody who's been giving virtual lectures now for a couple years, it's pretty fantastic to be able to see an audience, to see you guys smile or laugh or fall asleep. It's very useful to know if your audience is falling asleep because then you know you got to real speed through this section. My name is Patti Swanson. I started Chicago for Chicagoans in 2016, which was almost 6 years ago. We started off giving walking tours of Chicago neighborhoods. We then started this winter lecture series. We've been doing this for 5 years now. It's our 5th lecture series. One was digital, but I still count it. And we're here because of the generosity of our host. We're streaming live from the Old Chicago Inn, Room 13. Room 13 is a members-only speakeasy. You too can become a member and come here anytime you want. I shamelessly plug them because they're a mom-and-pop, family-owned small business, and they give us this room to do history lectures in, and it's pretty fantastic. It looks beautiful online. It's fun to be in, and we're really happy to be here. So shout out to them, and shout out to our bartender, Will. This organization is a 501c3. I filled out a lot of IRS paperwork for that designation. That means you can deduct any donation you feel like making from your taxes. Ooh, taxes. There's a lot of ways you can donate. ChicagoForChicagoans.org/donate. The thing that takes the least amount of fees is cash. We also accept check, credit card, firstborn babies, Venmo, etc. The thing that takes the most fees is Venmo, and Eventbrite. So if you like your money to go to nonprofits and not fee organizations, donor box or cash. Always the best. We're a pay what you can organization from day one. I was very passionate about making sure that these events were always accessible, that anyone in Chicago could learn about the history of their city without having to cough up $50 for a ticket. We remain that way on purpose. It means that if you're financially stable, please throw us a little extra green. We appreciate it. If you're not financially stable, leave us a review on the line. That matters a lot too. So thank you guys again for being here. Thanks for your support of this organization through an incredibly difficult 2 years. We got online. That was fun. Now we do stuff online. Pretty crazy. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for coming along on this journey. This lecture series, we're exactly halfway through now. We have a few more lectures to go. So please tune in every Thursday. We'll be here presenting on many different topics. The theme this year is Chicago Obscura. So kind of weird, overlooked, oft-forgotten histories, all the things that our lecturers and researchers were Googling for fun during 2 years of being stuck inside. All right. I think that's most of the business out of the way, and I stalled for enough time. Everybody has drinks now. So I'll go ahead and, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker. It's me. Thank you. I thrive on applause. I've been giving tours in Chicago for almost a decade now. I started off as a tour guide for my alma mater, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, represent. I gave tours for them in the Loop, and walking between all of these buildings, you have to find a way to talk to prospective college students' parents. So I started talking about buildings. I ended up getting a degree there in architectural history, which was very fun and is so useful. But all jokes aside, it is useful. I give boat tours in college, downtown on the river, and 6 years ago started giving neighborhood tours. So I consider myself today a neighborhood historian. The Loop is where I fell in love with buildings. It's where I fell in love with Chicago. I was actually born and raised in Texas. So the Loop emphasized, it was just cities. It was cities, it was urban space. It represented everything that was not rural Texas. So the Loop is where I fell in love with buildings, but now I kind of look at the Loop like a Disney version of a city. It's too clean, there's no personality there. You have all this fantastic architecture, but it's by these very prestigious firms, The one bit of humanity in the Loop that I really like is Marina City. Everybody's like mishung Christmas lights on their balconies. Brings me a lot of joy, but there's really not that much evidence of human habitation in the Loop, which is how I fell in love with the neighborhoods. My family, my dad's family, is all from Chicago. My great-grandfather was born at Swedish Hospital, and then came home to a bungalow that's about a 5-minute walk from my apartment. So that's pretty crazy. But it made me start wondering about the history of my own neighborhood. I live in Albany Park, it's the best. And it made me start wondering about what's going on in these neighborhoods, because that's where we all live. They're messy, they're vibrant, they're colorful. You can tell people live there. I mean, neighborhoods are the best, but nobody's really giving tours of them, which is why, that's why you're all here. But so neighborhoods. One of the things that I've realized in studying neighborhoods obsessively for the last 6 years and doing so many deep dives in the histories of specific neighborhoods is that they're all incredibly unique. Chicago, unfortunately, is one of the most segregated cities in the country, and it has been for a really long time. There's many negative effects of that, but the sort of silver lining is that we have these really interesting cultural tapestries in every single one of our neighborhoods. You look at a neighborhood like Pilsen, it's bohemian and Czech in architecture and Latin and murals and all these great Hispanic-owned businesses there. Up in Albany Park, we have what I think may be the only example in a city of a building that was built as a synagogue, became a church, and is now a mosque. And it's these layers to neighborhoods that make them so interesting and so compelling to me. And while there's so many differences, there's also so many similarities. Our neighborhoods have gone through a lot of the same challenges over time. A lot of them struggled with urban renewal. A lot have struggled with flight. The people that were living there just moving away. All of them have seen rebirth. Many of them were created by the same developers. They were created for the same reasons. They were created around the same time. And many of our neighborhoods have this really great shared collective history, which conveniently segues into our topic tonight. Almost every single tour I've ever given in a Chicago neighborhood or been on in a Chicago neighborhood, demolition has come up. Every single neighborhood has experienced some sort of profound demolition. And while demolition is not always bad, it is always controversial. Every single time. And I think that's because demolition in neighborhoods feels so deeply personal. It really fucks with people. You're losing maybe this corner landmark that you would tell people, oh, I live around the corner from, this church. When that church gets torn down, you feel it. When you tear down a school, that's somewhere hundreds of thousands of people spent 8 hours a day, whether they were working or going to school there. When you tear down a house, somebody lived there. They had their babies there. They raised their babies there. They watched people live and die in that space, and watching a building you lived in that get torn down, it fucks with you. It really does. And a lot of times people point to industrial buildings. They're like, okay, well, an industrial building, we can tear that down, right? That's safe. It's not, though. That's where, again, hundreds of thousands of people spent 8 hours a day there. They recently have made a plan to redevelop and tear down the factory where my uncle worked for his entire career, 40 some odd years. It's out in the suburbs. I forget which suburb. It's near Arlington Heights. But you know, he is so sad to see this place go. And it's not a spectacular building. It's kind of boring. But it means so much to him, and he and all his coworkers like drink at like Arlington Heights bars, just like reminiscing about this place that's now gone, you know, or will be gone. So every single demolition really draws a lot of passion, a lot of fury, a lot of people saying, we have to do it, forward is the future, and other people say, no, protect every single thing. You know, so there's a fine line in between, but demolition's always controversial, and every neighborhood has it. Let's see. So let's talk about some history. So before we can tear everything down, we have to build some stuff, right? So in Chicago, most neighborhoods really start getting built in the late 1800s. And the first wave of construction in our neighborhoods are infrastructure, streets, stop signs for carriages or whatever, parks, sewer systems, sidewalks, and the first wave of housing, right? Typically in neighborhoods, you see a lot of early frame housing, brick housing, you know, simple stuff that went up really quickly, a lot of single family homes. Now there's a little thing that happened, you guys might remember, World War I. World War I is actually the source of what became Chicago's first housing crisis. Basically, when you send all of your eligible bachelors or young men off to war in a different country, they leave behind jobs and apartments that other people fill. You know, a lot of people gain access to certain career fields because of that. But those soldiers return from war, and they find their apartment is no longer available, and neither, many times, were their jobs. And they didn't have anywhere to live. So during the 1910s and 1920s, that's where we see our first round of demolitions, because we don't have enough places to put people. So what we started doing is tearing down those early 1800s, you know, 1880, 1890. They'd barely been up for 20, 30 years at that point. But we started tearing down those single family homes so that we can build apartment buildings. So how many of you guys live in like a 1920s apartment building? Maybe a courtyard apartment building, maybe a 3-flat, maybe a 6-flat? Yeah, lots of us. I live in a courtyard apartment building. It was built in 1924-ish, who knows? And those apartment buildings, they would tear down these single family homes or these last homesteads, farm houses, and build these higher density properties because we desperately needed places for people to live. So that's kind of our first round of demolitions. Those weren't horrible, though again, people were losing homes that they'd lived in for decades. But let's talk a little bit about the Loop, because the 1910s and 20s were a boom across the entire city. Not just neighborhoods were changing, the very fabric of downtown was changing. The slides, you don't need them, but if you want them, there's packets, there's packets, there's QR codes. If you're watching online, there's a link in the description of this video. Look for it, and in the comments. So the 1910s and 20s, I could talk about for a million years. That's a different lecture. But I'm going to focus on one specific architecture firm, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. In many ways, the successor firm to Daniel Burnham, my 19th century boyfriend. One of them. In case you're wondering, the other one is Troy Perkins. Ask me about that later. So, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White was the largest architectural firm under one roof during the first half of the 20th century. I'm going to just very quickly run through a list of the buildings they designed in this period of 1910 to 1930. Union Station, 1913. Marshall Fields, 1914. Wrigley Building, 1919. Old Post Office, 1921. Merchandise Mart, 1923. Shedd Aquarium, 1925. Civic Opera House, 1927. That's just the highlight reel. The these are still icons of our city. These are still some of the most famous buildings that we have, all built in this 20-year period, all by the same firm. Now let's talk about the Great Depression. 1934. The only commission that Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White received that year, as far as I can find, and according to one former professor I had, was the old Heidelberg restaurant. You may know it better as the former Argo Tea next to the former Oriental Theater. Niedermeyer, I don't know what it is now. There's some pictures of it in the packets if you need a little refresher. Cute little German as hell building. That is the only commission, as far as I know, that they built in 1934. In times of economic downturn, architecture firms generally close. And in times of economic upturn, architecture firms open. Most of the buildings we all live in, those 1920s buildings, maybe you live in a really beautiful 1890s house, whatever it is, most of those were built by architecture firms that built, 5 houses scattered all over the city, and then they went out of business in the Great Depression. We lost most of the architecture firms that built our city in the Great Depression. And the ones that survived were at one point the largest architectural firm under one roof. And the only job they got, as far as I know, someone please prove me wrong if you can, in 1934 was a permanent location for what was functionally a food stall at the 1933 World's Fair. The Heidelberg family had a very successful German restaurant at the 1933 World's Fair, which stretched into 1934, and they said, hey, let's open a permanent restaurant. We're doing great. Yeah. So they went to the biggest and the best, but really they went to one of the only ones that had survived. The Great Depression was particularly severe in Chicago for a number of reasons. Chief amongst it, our primary industry at the time was manufacturing. We did the Industrial Revolution hard, y'all. It was the hardest sector hit nationally. Here's a fun statistic for you. Only 50% of the Chicagoans who had worked in manufacturing in 1927 still had jobs 6 years later in 1933. 50% of the people working in our largest industry were unemployed. There was another instance of very unfortunate timing. In 1928, the city did a property reassessment. I don't own property, but every person in Chicago I know that does is constantly complaining about their assessments and their property taxes going up, so this is not a new issue. In 1928, there was a property reassessment that prevented the city from collecting taxes until it was resolved. It was also immediately followed by a widespread tax strike. Take notes, property owners. And by February 1st, due to deficits caused by this incredibly unfortunate timing, again, Great Depression for everybody started what year? 1929. Oh, you guys are good. 1929. So by 1932, the city's emergency relief funds are completely depleted and they can no longer pay city payroll. That's how bad it is. Fortunately, we rebounded very quickly. In the 1930s, we had so many protests, labor strikes, widespread unionizing, and the Great Depression is what formed the backbone of the then relatively diverse democratic machine here in Chicago. I gave an entire separate lecture on labor history. It's available on our Facebook page. You can watch it. I could go on about that. But, okay, lots of strikes in the 1930s. Everyone's upset. And we formed the democratic machine. Now, this really impressed a certain someone sitting in the White House at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was pretty jazzed about the amount of new Democratic voters coming out of Chicago, so he kind of told everybody, give a heavy hand of New Deal funds to this city. These people rock. Those New Deal funds paid for the construction of Lakeshore Drive, the reconstruction and finishing Lakeshore Drive. It paid for the landscaping of numerous parks, constructed 30 new schools, and built the State Street subway. So we got a lot of money from the New Deal. And then again, by the 1940s, World War II production efforts pretty much brought us back out of the Depression, and things were smooth sailing from then forever on. Just kidding. So World War II, again, we have the same pattern where all of our eligible bachelors and young white men are sent to fight in World War II. To give you a little perspective, by D-Day in 1944, the average Chicago block had given 7 residents to the military. That is 7 neighbors on your block. Only the white ones, really. We were a huge wartime producer, second only to Detroit. To fill all those manufacturing jobs, we brought in anybody that would work on them. A lot of women gained access to jobs they'd traditionally been unable to hold. And this is around the time that the Great Migration begins. So that's about 60,000 black folks moving from the South up here to urban, mostly industrial cities like Chicago. Between 1940 and 1944, many of them took jobs in factories, and many of them were newly represented by unions. And, you know, all those soldiers, guess what? They came home. Guess where their jobs were? Not there. Not anymore. So we had yet another housing crisis right after World War II. But we solved this one very, very differently. The first thing that we did was build temporary housing. Rogers Park, the actual park, not the neighborhood. Rogers' actual park, I think, is technically in Westridge. I find that very funny. They have a notorious rivalry. Hashtag cabbage. Okay. So, come on, our tours. So after World War II, the Chicago Housing Authority builds temporary housing in many public spaces, public parks. Those housings were functionally semicircle steel structures. Some of the older folks may remember these, but they were known as Quonset huts. Hold on, let me just find the correct page. It's the one labeled Housing Boom, Suburbia. Oops, spoiler alert. Quonset huts. There's a picture there in the packet if you care to look. Or just Google Quonset huts. Quonset. Quonset huts. And these were temporary housing, though. We really just built them to house veterans while we furiously scrambled to build other housing. So, following the same pattern that built all of our neighborhoods, Albany Park being a great example, Albany Park was basically farmland until 1893, which is where a developer sniffed out a deal and went there, said, I'm going to buy all this land, subdivide it, and start building a shitload of bungalows, and everybody's going to want to live there. That was a pretty good strategy. Everybody did want to live there. Albany Park is still part of the Bungalow Belt. The Bungalow Belt functionally being the first suburbs of the city of Chicago. If you don't know what a Chicago bungalow is, see me after. So this is not a new pattern. The suburbs were not a new pattern. What happened is we had just filled up all the available land in the city for the most part. So we started looking further out, and further out was the suburbs. So speculative real estate developers started to buy land on the outskirts of the city where they built new neighborhoods. GIs, eager to settle down, loved them. They conveniently happened to have yards and other nice amenities you couldn't have in a tight city lot. And between 1948 and 1958, 85% of the new homes built in the United States were located in suburbs. Businesses followed. It was a great draw for businesses. Not only did your workforce largely move out there, you also, manufacturing had changed. You no longer wanted to do manufacturing on a multi-level building. You wanted one giant single-story thing that could accommodate assembly lines. So the suburbs, again, represented a lot of potential for these businesses. There was also this very funny theory at the time that's totally bogus, but companies thought they might get better workers outside of town because workers would be homeowners and they'd be less likely to join a union. What logic that is, I don't know. Meanwhile, in the city was everybody who wasn't white, a GI, and or middle class to rich. So again, this is a whole separate lecture, but functionally, for years, Chicago had restrictive covenants, which functionally prevented black folks from living anywhere in the city except a very overpopulated strip that runs basically where the Dan Ryan Highway is today. We'll talk about that. Known as the Black Belt. By 1940, 80% of the properties in Chicago carried some kind of restriction. So these restrictive covenants basically said you can't be black and live here. That's a lot boiled down, but functionally that. Fortunately, in 1948, the Supreme Court declared these racially restrictive covenants unconstitutional. So for the first time, a lot of discriminated against racial groups, predominantly in Chicago, black folks, had access to parts of the city they'd never been able to live in before. Additionally, a lot of that housing was empty because of this concept we call white flight. again, all those GIs moving out to the suburbs. And then you have really disgusting, comically evil Batman villain type activities, such as blockbusting. Blockbusting is where a real estate agent hires a suspicious looking black man to loiter on your corner and harass people as they walk by. And then that same real estate agent comes to your house and says, "You should be scared, the black people are coming." And then you sell your house at a bargain basement price, and you move out to the suburbs. That real estate agent then takes your house and sells it to a black family for an incredible fortune. And this black family has traditionally, at this point in history, been living in the Black Belt with a large family crammed into a small apartment, and they say, "I'll do anything to get the hell out of where I am now," and they buy it. Blockbusting, cartoonishly evil Batman villain antics. And real history, incredibly depressing. Shout out to Beverly, a neighborhood that resisted blockbusting surprisingly well by starting a historical society, encouraging people that you don't want to give up your home. Your home is an architectural treasure. And actually, a Beverly community group sued several real estate. They did a whole-scale investigation where they sent white families to buy a house, black families to buy a house, and ended up winning. Shout out to Beverly area community groups of the 70s. So again, more available housing in the cities, but you really couldn't move to the suburbs easily if you were a person of color. Specifically because all those racial covenants that had been declared illegal by the Supreme Court in 1948 didn't necessarily prevent people from enforcing them. So they would use things like homeowners associations. They would say, well, to live in this neighborhood, you have to join the homeowners association, and we don't want you. They would refuse to grant mortgages to people of color, especially local banks, and they would just straight out do unconstitutional racial bans, in addition to just straight up intimidation. Really gross. So if you're a person of color around this time, you're not moving to the suburbs. And then there's this thing called redlining. Redlining, there's some maps. I love a map, you guys. Love a map. There's lots of them in this packet. Redlining, I cannot recommend enough. There's actually this amazing website that I got these images from. And I didn't write the link down, but I'll send it to you later. If you Google mapping inequality, thank you. It's called Mapping Inequality. You can actually zoom in on redlining maps of most major cities in the US. And it's fascinating. So if you look at these redlining maps, they were created in 1933 using New Deal funding by something known as the Homeowners Loan Corporation. They created maps of the city and they labeled areas with colors. The colors corresponded to markers such as best, mostly green, mostly suburbs. Still desirable. Maybe that's blue, I forget. Definitely declining, that's yellow. Hazardous, that's red. And the hazardous neighborhoods were marked in red, thus the practice was called redlining. If you look at these maps, you will notice that the entire inner city of Chicago is either red or yellow. And all of the suburbs are green and blue. Now, these maps were created by humans, and some of those humans were racist as hell. So there was this thing called colored infiltration. That is a real criteria used by people at the Homeowners Loan Corporation to label a neighborhood hazardous. They would also look at things like poorly maintained units or overcrowded dwellings, things people had forced black folks in Chicago into, and then say, oh, this is hazardous too. New housing, again, received green lines. Now, the issue with these redlining maps, if they had just been created and then ignored, it would have been fine. But then banks started looking at these maps to determine where they were willing to lend money for mortgages. So the Federal Housing Authority published these lending standards, and they said, these are the properties we're willing to approve mortgages for, and these are the ones that we don't want to give you money for. Our excellent speaker, Elsa Harstad, speaking about the history of public housing, a couple weeks ago, mentioned that mortgages are actually the most common form of public housing across the country because mortgages are subsidized by the government. You're all in public housing, unless you inherited your house or whatever. Now the problem is the loans that you could get in the city were largely small and for short duration. It was generally cheaper to purchase a new home than to modernize one of the older ones. And it really just led to continuing decay of the city's urban properties. Middle-class folks who even had wanted to stay in the city couldn't afford to because they couldn't get a loan to fix up an old building that they loved. So they too reluctantly moved to the suburbs. I spoke with a homeowner in Logan Square a couple of years ago who told me how hard he had to fight to get funding to buy a house in Logan Square in the 70s. A house is probably worth hella money now. And he's a white guy. He went to, dozens of banks before somebody would approve a mortgage for him in Logan Square. Pretty crazy. So, these neighborhoods began to crumble. And there's so many factors as to why they crumbled. Believe it or not, this is only the sprinkles on top of the birthday cake made of poop. Pretty proud of that metaphor. And what did end up happening is a lot of the single-family homes were broken down and converted into boarding houses or rooming houses. A lot of proliferation of slumlords. And by 1943, there was a survey that found there were almost 250,000 substandard housing units within a 23 square mile zone of blight. The most desperate conditions of which were largely on the south and west side. Coincidentally, the south and west side is where most of our people of color lived. Interesting. And poor white people too. We didn't care about you if you had money. So, this leads to something called urban renewal. You might be familiar with the term, but let's talk a little bit about it. Urban renewal, there's just so many factors that go into this. I'm kind of hitting the top line things. You can get degrees in this, you guys. But a big drive for urban renewal on paper was the needs of suburbia and the need to modernize the city. So first of all, you just had the majority of your working class move out to the suburbs. And there's not public transit lines that really run to the suburbs. So you've moved to the suburbs, you have a garage for the first time in your life, you have a driveway, you have a fancy new Cadillac. And you're gonna drive to your job that's still in the inner city, the dangerous inner city. But it's very difficult for you to get from your home in the suburbs into the city because our cities weren't built for cars. Not until you get to fucking Houston, sorry. I grew up outside of Austin. It's inherent in me. It's not until you get to cities mostly in the South, Atlanta, Houston, LA, all of those modern cities were built for cars. But our older cities, our Rust Belt cities here in the Midwest, all along the East Coast, those were built for people. Those were built for wagons. They were built with just very organic street grid systems, or maybe like a little bit of thought in the case of Chicago, but even Daniel Burnham, our great city planner in 1909, assumed cars would remain a luxury plaything of the wealthy, and people would take public transit out to the skirts of the city where then they would get in their car and go for a pleasure drive. That is what Daniel Burnham thought, and he created the 1909 plan for the city of Chicago. So our city, it was not built for cars. Local streets were not designed to accommodate the volume of traffic they were now receiving. And urban planners, love them and hate them, they began dreaming of free-flowing roads where there would be no stoplights and you could get to work so quickly.
This planner hates cars.
Yeah, not all urban planners like cars, but they all have big dreams.
Make no small plans.
Make no little plans. In fact, make giant, huge ones that are complicated, difficult for people to understand, and don't necessarily take the needs of the community into account. Sorry. I love urban planners. I'm friends with lots of them. They've taught me like half this stuff. Okay, anyway. So, superhighways was the answer. We're going to build superhighways, and they will help move traffic between the suburbs and the downtown core. In 1940, just going to check how long I've been talking. Oh dear, okay. So, Okay. Ooh, okay. We talk about bricks at the end. I did not bring a brick. Okay. Guys, look around you. This whole place is built of common brick.
What's the difference between a common brick and another brick?
We're gonna get to it. Okay. Somebody asked for the internet viewers. Somebody asked, "What's the difference between a common brick and a regular brick?" Spoiler alert: no such thing as regular brick. That's coming later. Superhighways. That's where we are right now. So, 1940, the first plans in Chicago are approved for highways, beginning with the traffic-clogged west side along Congress, per Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan. He envisioned this major roadway that would run basically where Congress, now Ida B. Wells, would run all the way west. He had lots of plans. So the Eisenhower is the first highway we get. It's built between 1949 and 1961 at a cost of $183 million. It displaced an estimated 13,000 people and forced out more than 400 businesses in Chicago alone. So highways have to go somewhere where there are already people, there are already businesses, and there are already lives. Now, what's kind of interesting is if you look at these highways, they very conveniently cut through neighborhoods full of immigrants where it was easier to get away with it. So, I mean, the Eisenhower is why Greektown is 3 restaurants and the National Hellenic Museum. Greektown used to be not that. I mean, they just cut through a lot of these immigrant neighborhoods as a means to an end. Because the people that were living in the city didn't matter. The people that were living in the suburbs mattered, and the people in the suburbs wanted a highway, because highways were going to fix everything. So the first neighborhoods to go, chiefly Italian, Mexican, Greek, Jewish, and Black. At the time, on the west side, it was 40% Black, which was the highest concentration of Black folks citywide. Very convenient that that's where the highway went. The interstate highway system follows by presidential decree. Oh, no.
You're not drinking nearly enough.
Uh-oh.
That.
Oh! Yes, please, thank you. Well, cheers. I'm only drinking purple today. You gotta stay drunk for this lecture, you guys. You need to take a break and go get yourself a refill. No judgment here. I'm loud. So, the interstate highway system is developed by, I'm going to give you one guess, which president in 1956? Eisenhower. That's why we named the Congress Expressway for Eisenhower. Eminent domain laws are largely used to create land for the highway system. They are popularized by promoting the idea of clearing blighted properties, modernizing the city, revitalizing the area, and facilitating easy trips between the growing suburbs and the downtown core. Now, the Housing Act of 1949 was incredibly important because the Housing Act of 1949 required local agencies to find new housing for those who were displaced by urban redevelopment activities. But land taking for highways had no such requirement. So when I mentioned the Eisenhower displaced 13,000 people, none of those people were given help finding homes elsewhere.
Were they compensated? No.
Maybe they were compensated, maybe they weren't. Probably they weren't. If you were buying the building, you just kind of said, it's eminent domain, you have to do it for the good of your city, not get the fuck out. I don't know if they were paid. I think they probably were. I mean, it doesn't cost $183 million in 1949 to build a highway, so a lot of that money probably went to purchasing business owners and purchasing buildings, but none of those people were offered help to find housing elsewhere, and that's why the Greek community scattered. It's why there's not a big Greek community here in Chicago anymore. It's why you find more Greek communities out in the suburbs. It's why you find more Jewish communities out in the suburbs. It's why you find Mexican folks moved to Pilsen. All around this time in the 1950s. People scattered. I mean, those communities were lost. You lost your neighbors. You gained a highway. And if you did stay in your house is now next to a fucking highway. So after a few years, you got tired of breathing in fumes and your kids getting asthma, and you left too. In 1960, the Kennedy was constructed. That displaced the poor half of the Polish neighborhood. At one point, Chicago was the second largest population of Polish people outside of Warsaw. There was the fancy side of the Polish neighborhood, which is what we call Wicker Park today. And then there was the not so nice part of the Polish neighborhood, which is what we call the Kennedy Expressway today. I think I put a picture on the packet. If you've ever driven on the Kennedy Expressway, you'll notice Wicker Park-ish area, you actually drive around a giant church. That's St. Stanislaus, and that was barely saved. No, I did not include a picture. Well, Google it. It's Polish, just put a lot of consonants in there, you'll get it. Sorry, no offense. My family's all German, so like I get the consonants thing. So you literally drive on an expressway around a church that was barely saved. And in fact, there was a school attached to the church as well, which was not saved. They only saved the church. The Dan Ryan, built in 1961. Very curious thing about the Dan Ryan, and we do have a picture of the Dan Ryan here in this packet, I believe. Oh, yes. You'll want to look at the page titled Highways as Urban Renewal with a picture of Mr. Richard J. Daley. Now, I included an image of Bridgeport. One thing you will notice about the about the Dan Ryan Expressway is that it conveniently curves and goes around Bridgeport. Does anyone know why the Dan Ryan Expressway does not run through Bridgeport in a straight line? It's because Mayor Richard J. Daley lived in Bridgeport. Instead, they just ran the Dan Ryan Expressway through the Black Belt. The reason we don't have any of that legacy of the Black Belt is because they literally tore it down and built a highway on top of it. And then later they tore it down and built public housing. And we have a little bit of Bronzeville, but Bronzeville should look older than it does. And that's because most of it was torn down. What's kind of interesting, though, and what's ironic about all of this, is there's been a ton of data proving, tons of studies, traffic engineers, economists, urban planners, have proven that building bigger roads does not improve traffic. In fact, it makes it worse. Because look, we all got places to be. You're going to get to work the fastest fucking way you can get to work, so you don't have to wake up early, right? So if the fastest way for you to get to work is on a train, you take the train. How many of you have taken the train because taking an Uber would take the same amount of time? Right, and the train costs $2.25. I think they made it cheaper. Anyway.
$2.50.
No.
It's going to $2.25.
Oh. Well, the point is, it's way cheaper than an Uber. So if the fastest way for you to get to work is to take the train, you take the train. If the fastest way for you to get to work is to take a bike, you take a bike. If the fastest way for you to get to work is to drive, you drive. So if you build a giant road with a ton of space on it, it's going to take you 10 minutes to get to work, where you used to have to sit on the train for an hour. So you're going to drive. And the more roads you build and the bigger roads you build, the more space there is on the highway, the faster it is for you to get to work. So you take your car, or you take a taxi, or you take an Uber, or you take a Lyft. That's what you do. That's how humans are. So building a bigger road doesn't fix the traffic problem. Building public transit diversifies the issue. Building bike lanes spreads the people around. So what's kind of interesting is the United States Senate is currently funding several studies to have major highways removed from urban cores. They're doing it in a lot of cities that we don't think about very much, like Rochester, Buffalo. Shout out to my upstate New Yorkers. So they're actually studying this. They're saying Rochester's a great example. They recently took out a major highway in Rochester, literally filled it in, have put up housing and parks, and it has not made the traffic worse. And people are like, oh, cool, sick, new housing and parks. I love housing and parks. Nobody misses a highway when you take it down. There's many people who look at the way Chicago is designed and suggest the same thing. It's a little tricky because highways do have a benefit. If you are a rural town along an interstate expressway, that is your connection to the world. It's how you get places. Highways are useful. They do have a proven economic and social benefit to our country as a whole, but there's no economic or social benefit to a highway running through the center of an urban core. In fact, it just makes living downtown suck, and it makes driving downtown suck worse. And that is why I have a dash cam. Okay, other things that led to demolition. So it's icy, y'all. I was raised in Texas. I don't know how to drive on ice. I have so many Midwestern relatives buried in cornfields, but they didn't teach me how to drive. All right, other factors leading to demolition. Highways is a big one. Illinois incentives. There were at least 4 different redevelopment acts passed between 1941 and 1953, expanding the city's right and ability to seize property for public purposes and slum clearance. Public purposes and slum clearance. Laws then permitted the city to transfer those properties that they had ordered to be cleared to private developers that it saw as desirable, in the hopes of maintaining the downtown. This is a last-ditch effort for the city of Chicago. They're like, okay, we'll just expand eminent domain, we'll destroy anything we don't like, and then we'll give it to somebody who will do something good with it. What that led to is educational expansions. So that is where many universities and hospitals take advantage of these laws. The University of Chicago famously destroys the Mexican community and forces them to move to Pilsen. The University of Chicago continues to appropriate large chunks of Hyde Park and Woodlawn. DePaul, they take a bunch of stuff. IIT, they also take a bunch of stuff, chiefly Brownsville. Thanks, IIT. Michael Reese Hospital, another good example. Mercy Hospital, all of these are seen as desirable entities by the city of Chicago, so they are given permission to wholesale clear areas near their campus, purchase that land at a very deeply discounted price, and then build universities there. That's not all bad. I mean, universities are an incredible part of Chicago's fabric today. Universities bring young people here. A lot of people come for college and then never leave. I mean, there's a million great things that universities and hospitals bring to our city, and I don't mean to say that they don't. Universities being a huge reason why the South Loop saw revitalization in the 1990s. Shout out to Columbia College Chicago. But it's still unfair to take people's home and then build an expansion to the University of Chicago on it. A lot of community colleges were built in this way too. Uptown's Truman College, which was built in 1977, replaced Hillbilly Harlem. It was a community in Uptown of about 3,000 poor Appalachian whites. What's very convenient is that that same site where Truman College was built is the same place where you had the epicenter of the Rainbow Coalition. That is, if anybody saw Judas and the Black Messiah, that is where Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers was organizing with the Young Patriots, which was a group of young white men from the South waving Confederate flags, and the Young Lords, who are predominantly Latin organization. Those 3 groups were coming together and staging very effective community activism, protests, riots, and strikes. Very convenient that you would just take that land from all those white people causing trouble and build yourself a community college. You can't be the bad guy as a city. You built a community college. Community colleges are great. I love community colleges, but that doesn't mean you should steal someone's home to make it. Also, it's not like they rehomed those people. They didn't, actually. Most of those Appalachian whites moved back to Appalachia. Now let's talk about the 1968 riots. God, I'm trying to keep it really light today. So it's the radical 1960s now. We've torn down giant chunks of the city to build highways, to build colleges, to build hospitals, etc. It is the civil rights movement. It is Vietnam War protests. It is the equal pay movement, feminism, woo-woo. And it's the summer of love. So we're all fucking, or our parents are. Anyway. Pardon my language. April 4th of 1968, Martin Luther King is assassinated. On April 5th, riots break out in over 100 major U.S. cities protesting the assassination of Martin Luther King. There is over, again, 100 major U.S. cities experience some form of riot, protest, or strike, resulting in about $50 million of damage. In Chicago, there were 48 hours of rioting, which left 11 dead, 48 people wounded by police, 90 policemen injured, 2,000 people arrested, 1,000 people left homeless, 3 miles of East Garfield Park and West Garfield Park along West Madison Street were ultimately left in a state of rubble. There were over 125 fires on April 4th and 5th, with over 210 buildings damaged, totaling $10 million worth of destruction. It does not matter. This is an incredibly tumultuous time in our history. It doesn't matter who's to blame. The point is, the entire West Side was decimated. That's really the important takeaway. 210 buildings, 125 fires, $10 million worth of destruction. And West Madison Street, which was once the epicenter of predominantly people of color's neighborhoods, it was the commercial hub of the West Side. It was incredibly impactful. There are amazing stories about Madison Street you can listen to in archives, especially oral archives, like StoryCorps. Gone. Gone in 48 fucking hours. But there's a silver lining. April 4th, MLK assassinated. April 5th and 6th, bunch of riots. April 11th, the Fair Housing Act is signed into law. We got one. Fair Housing Act prevents discrimination in real estate transactions functionally. That's boiling it down a lot. But essentially, you can't discriminate against someone when you're finding them housing. We also, in the 1960s, begin thinking about preservation. Chicago and the United States are relatively new cities. We're a relatively new country. We didn't have anything to protect, really, that we recognized as something we could protect until about the 1960s, when large chunks of the city start getting demolished. When you have this wholesale clearance to build public housing projects, when you have this wholesale clearance to build highways, to clear the destruction from riots, for all of these different things, people start going, holy hell, maybe we should save some of this stuff. Some of this is quite lovely. So the big catalyst in preservation as we know it in the United States is Penn Station. 1963, Penn Station is torn down. And this kicks off a wave, along with other things happening parallel in other cities like Chicago in the 60s. We start passing preservation law. In 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act is passed. It creates the National Register of Historic Places. The Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, and Section 106, which is a legal status for historic preservation in federal planning. The National Historic Preservation Act is incredibly transformative for preservation in the United States. In 1968, Chicago's Commission on Chicago Landmarks is established. The same year MLK is assassinated, the same year all of this craziness in 1968, we get the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. The Commission on Chicago Landmarks, to this day, determines what is a local landmark, reviews proposed alterations to existing landmarks and districts, and reviews proposed demolitions. Shout out for the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. You guys, they have like 3 staff members, and they are so overwhelmed. So truly, to the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, I salute you.
It's not enough. Gotta be fun.
In 1971, Landmarks Illinois is established. You might recognize Landmarks Illinois from their advocacy work, like the top 10 most endangered places in the state of Illinois. The Thompson Center was recently on that list for like a million years in a row. Landmarks Illinois is created out of protests regarding the demolition of Adler and Sullivan. Louis Sullivan, may have heard of him. His Chicago Stock Exchange building, built in 1893. There are such widespread protests around the demolition of the Stock Exchange building that Landmarks Illinois is created. It wasn't called Landmarks Illinois back then. It was more narrowly focused in the city of Chicago, but it expanded eventually to serve the entire state and continues. They're a nonprofit. You can donate to them too. They continue to facilitate, promote, and educate people about historic preservation. So at the same time we're destroying a lot of things, we're also thinking about how we should protect them and passing rules and laws and regulations that prevent some of these demolitions moving forward. Let's talk a little bit about preservation misconceptions. Listing a building on the National Register of Historic Places, does that protect it?
Nope.
No, it does not. But it generates a lot of really good paperwork local historians can use. And other ways I research my tours. The more, generally speaking, the more local and the more specific the landmark is, the more protected the building is. So a Chicago landmark is harder to tear down than a building that appears on a state registry or national registry. Landmarking or inclusion in a historic district also does not entirely prevent a building from being demolished or irreversibly damaged, but it does make it difficult. So in addition, if you have a building that's landmarked in some way, part of a district, individually landmarked, whatever it is, you will face reviews every time you file a building permit. There will be delays instituted, usually a period of days, like 180 days, for the Landmarks Commission to review the demolition proposal and decide whether or not they want to okay it. And you'll also experience steep fines if you break any of the rules. Unfortunately, shady owners do all kinds of shady shit in Chicago all the time, and they just do it and then say, whoopsies, okay, I'll pay the fine. That happens all the time. It happens constantly in the city of Chicago. If you love a building that's near you, watch it like a fucking hawk. You see somebody with a hard hat walking around it, you ask them what they're doing. I sometimes am a person in a hard hat walking around a building, and I love when people accost me. I'm like, I'm saving it. There's also something called demolition by neglect. Since 2019, this is very recent history, an ordinance was passed in Chicago to help prevent this. Basically, if it's determined that a landmarked building fell into disrepair because of intentional neglect on behalf of the business owner or the building owner, the building, you not only have to pay a fine, you are not, they will not give you a permit to build new construction on that lot for a period of 2 years. There's a waiting period too. It's not a long waiting period, but it's something. Because one of the strategies shady developers were using is like, I will buy the building, I will let it decay, and then I will say, oh, I can't fix it, it's too expensive. I think that's how that goes. They also will do things like file permits under the incorrect street address, get them approved, and then tear down the building next door. It's like we created these things to prevent this, and yet you still suck. This part of my notes is titled Landmarking Equals Bad. There's a lot of critique of landmarking. Many people erroneously associate landmarking with gentrification. There's most of the things you might think about landmarking as being bad have come from developers that don't want landmarking rules to exist so they can continue tearing everything down. Landmarking is really just extra steps. That can be annoying for homeowners, I get that. Everything's annoying for homeowners though. Generally, it only affects anytime you file a building permit. You don't have to file a building permit to paint your house. You can paint your house whatever color you want. Or exterior alterations. If you're gonna tear off the top of your Chicago bungalow and build a hideous vinyl siding addition that goes up 6 stories, yeah, people are gonna get mad at you for that because that's just ugly and bad taste should be illegal. Landmarking generally has a neutral to beneficial effect on property values, and it opens up a lot of avenues that otherwise are closed off to homeowners. So landmarking, yeah, you gotta do extra steps. It might cost you more to do a nice addition with brick instead of vinyl siding. Don't buy a brick house if you don't like brick. But it gives you access to additional resources, educational resources, tax credits, grants, and a number of other additional protections and assistance. So there are a lot of benefits to landmarking, but I think from a neighborhood historian perspective, one that was very controversial was the designation of the Pilsen Historic District. A lot of people in Pilsen said this is gentrification, it's coming for us. But one of the benefits of landmarking the Pilsen Historic District is that now it is so much harder for a developer to tear down a single family home and build luxury condos. Now that developer has to go through extra steps. So if you already live in Pilsen, landmarking helps you because it de-incentivizes those sorts of really gross gentrification things. There's this great Medium article you should all read about the term douchebag. The article is pretty interesting, but my favorite thing about that article, which I quote incessantly, is that the hipster that moves to a cheap neighborhood usually doesn't have very much money. Maybe they start a local coffee shop because they crave community and they crave a tight-knit neighborhood and they want to create a small business. The douchebag is the one that buys out that indie coffee shop, turns it into a Starbucks, and then complains about the black people loitering on the corner out front of it. I say this as an artist. Most people I know have lived in neighborhoods that other people consider dangerous or cheap or prone to fires. Sorry, Pilsen. Most people I know, because they didn't have any money either. Artists themselves are not necessarily the harbingers of gentrification. It's the developers that see the artists walking down the street and think to themselves, there's potential here. Developers are the ones we all need to fight, or at least challenge the ideas of. And we don't do that effectively if we're too busy fighting ourselves. Look at the people around you that live in your neighborhood. Find the people that are on your side. Understand that you're on the same side. And then fight the real bad guys, because all the bad guys are trying to do is make you fight each other, because then you don't notice what they're doing. Okay, so let's talk about brick. I love brick. So I don't know if you guys remember, in 2020, there was a pandemic. And it turns out if you work in event planning and tourism during a pandemic, you are now unemployed. So that was a glaring hole in my employment history that I had never noticed before. So I had to get a big kid job, and I started working for a brick company. Worked for a brick company called Bricks Incorporated. They've been around since 1968. Shout out. I love my job. But it's taught me a lot about brick. And part of the reason I love the company I work for is that they are specifically interested in reclaiming Chicago common brick. So what is common brick? Chicago common brick is literally the backs and sides of every single building built in Chicago before 1970. You might notice it because the front of your building is red and then the back and side of it is weird brown, gray, pink. You know that stuff? Are we all on the same page? There's a picture of it. Don't worry, I'll find it. I really should have brought one. You're right, Anthony. It's okay, guys. Look at the walls of room 13. I know you can't see them if you're online. Google Chicago Common Brick. Brick of Chicago will come up. Look at that website. Okay. Yeah, I got pictures. So if you're not familiar with Chicago Common Brick, get familiar. It is the literal building block of your city. So this sounds like a detour, but I promise it's all going to come back around. Chicago's earliest brick factories appear about 1912, but they get a real boost in production. I should say their earliest brick factories are 1912 to 1933. Yeah, it doesn't make sense that there's brick factories in 1812. Okay, early on. Chicago's brick factories get a real boost to their business in 1871. Does anyone know what happened on October 8th of 1871? Small fire. Very small fire. What burns really well in fire? Wood and tar shingles and kerosene-soaked wood blocks that you're using as city streets. Chicago has a huge problem with wood They're terrified of fire. Chicago's building code is still so stupid because we're all so terrified of fire so many years later. But this is great for brick manufacturers. This is so good for brick manufacturers. Not only does Chicago happen to sit on what 14,000 years ago was carved out by a glacier and deposited an assload of clay, not only do we live very close to the organic material that creates brick, we also all of a sudden wanted to buy all of it in 1871. But Chicago common brick, early Chicago brick producers were really interested in volume. They didn't really care what it looked like. They were just like, we got to build a city because we got nothing right now. So they mined natural clay from Chicago's glacial lake beds, from our rivers. Some of you may be familiar with Riverview Amusement Park.
Yes.
Some of you older folks, maybe. Riverview Amusement Park, Roscoe Village, basically where the Mariano's, the Jewel, and the rest of the strip mall are today. That used to be an amusement park, and before that, it was a brickyard because it was along the river, and the river has all the clay. Tons of brickyards all throughout Chicago, throughout the suburbs, all the way north up into Milwaukee, all the way south into Indiana, anywhere they could find clay, they would start mining it and making bricks. In 1871, we have about 9 brick-making companies producing about 2 million bricks a year. By 1910s, which is the peak, we have 1.5 billion bricks being made in Chicago every year. This is data that comes from Will Quam of Brick of Chicago. He is a fantastic brick historian. He's the reason I have my job. And I taught him everything he knows about giving tours. But there's this pattern. You mine the clay, then you fill the pit in with trash, and then you sell it off to the city or a developer, and people build houses on it. That's what happened all throughout Chicago history. Unfortunately, most of these brick plants, again, very focused on volume, not very focused on quality. They would produce bricks that were ugly by then standards. They would produce bricks that varied between pink and yellow and gray and brown, every shade of it, and you didn't want that on the front of your building. What are you, a poor person? No, you put that on the backs and the sides of the building where you can be economical, and then you put the fancy brick from St. Louis on the front. That's the vibe here for a long time. By 1970, it turns out none of these brick plants ever bothered doing literally anything about people's lung health. So the Clean Air Act of 1970 functionally shuts down Chicago brick production. So it's very easy to point at the production of Chicago bricks from 1870 to 1970, about a 100-year period where we made this material. Chicago common brick there's so much of it. It's relatively high quality brick. It's solid. There's no holes in it. And all of a sudden, about 1968, we had a bunch of it. Because all these buildings got torn down. All of this demolition produced so much brick waste that it wouldn't even fit in the landfills. So what did people start doing? They started reclaiming it. The company I worked for was one of those early companies, and there were many other demolition contractors that got into the business of reclaiming brick. Because if you're demolishing it, you got to do something with it. You might as well stack it up, knock off the mortar, put it on a pallet, and sell it. And that's what people started doing. Now, originally, Chicago had no interest in this material. We were like, why would we buy that garbage brick? I'll pay 30 cents for that, maybe. So we sold a little bit of it here, but, the yard manager at my job who's been there for 47 years, he's like, oh, back in the day, nobody wanted that crap. So we would palletize it, put it on trains, and ship it south. Believe it or not, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas have a ton of Chicago common brick buildings. Because when they were building their cities later than ours, in the 70s and 80s, Chicagoans wanted nothing to do with this high quality reclaimed brick. And the South was all about it, y'all. So we shipped it wholesale to the South, and we sold off all that material, and we sold a little bit of it here. But things have changed. Things have changed dramatically. In the last 15 to 20 years, Chicagoans have become obsessed with Chicago common brick, which is great. It brings me so much joy to know that all of this demolition that's happened in our city and continues to happen in our city is producing something that we can still save. If you can't save the building, by God, the least thing you can do is save the stuff that went into it. Uh-oh.
You running low. You running low. I was doing the assignment.
Y'all are trying to kill me. I just got talking about bricks. Basically, any building built before 1950 is filled with good shit. They really don't build it the way they used to. So there are salvagers all over the city. The company I work for salvages brick. They're not the only ones. There's also a ton of companies that salvage a ton of other materials. Everything from wood. Shout out to Great Lakes Yard. And there's way too many slides about brick, and then on salvaging other materials. There's a number of people that reclaim wonderful things in our city that are small businesses that go to demolition sites and they save stuff. Everyone from people like Urban Remains, who are saving terracotta pieces and stained glass, to Great Lakes Yard, who's reclaiming wood, also a woman-owned business. To companies like mine that are reclaiming literally anything regarding masonry that we can stash in our warehouse for 30 years, and also a lot of brick. Reclaim steel windows. All of this reclamation stuff has become cool again, which is pretty awesome because now we're all eco-friendly, we're concerned about sustainability, we're interested in what happens to things when we tear them down. So in the last 15 to 20 years, it has become very cool to use old stuff in your new building. And there's a million different ways that people use it. So one of the slides here is called Salvage Leftovers equals Clean Fill. In addition to selling brick whole, companies like mine also cut it thin. And when you have a thin little slice of brick, you can sell it for people's fireplace and people's interior walls and for all kinds of different things like that. Every single bar you've been into Chicago, every Lou Malnati's, Giordano's, and Home Run and Pizza, all of them, they're all like, put Chicago common brick on the walls because pizza equals Chicago, brick equals Chicago. All of them do it. And people ask me all the time, what happens to the piece in the middle? You cut off each end, what happens to the piece in the middle? That also ends up getting reused. That little piece in the middle ends up getting put into a giant pile in the back of our brickyard. And contractors come and pick it up for free. Because when you're filling in an old basement, when you're shoring up a foundation, you need material that will not break down over time. You can't have wood in there or anything like that. Dirt is expensive. So why not take this free brick stuff? So every single brick from most buildings built between 1870 and 1970 is eventually salvaged by someone in our city. And a bunch of the other stuff there is reused as well, which is frickin' beautiful, y'all. I love it. Here's a diagram about courses and wides. Ask me later. Got a little ambitious about this. Okay, so I'm gonna work on winding up here. Winding down. Today in Chicago, there are still about 32,000 vacant lots. Most of these lots are on the south and west sides. If you look at the final page of the packet, there's a map with a bunch of green dots on it. This green dot shows you where those vacant lots are. One thing you will notice is that they are entirely on the south and west sides. Why? We've already gone through this. Racism. There are so many vacant lots in so many of these neighborhoods that people mistake the potential of these communities. Every single day I drive from Albany Park through North Lawndale all the way down to Little Village, which is where my company is. Every day I drive past hundreds of vacant lots, and I think to myself how close North Lawndale is to the Loop. How close North Lawndale is to Rush University. How close North Lawndale is to multiple train lines, metro lines, and a number of other resources that make neighborhoods great and desirable and wonderful to live in. But why isn't anybody investing and building these speculative development projects in North Lawndale? Why are they building them all in Lincoln Park, which is already full and already rich, right? What are we doing? And it's because if you have too many vacant lots in a community, people think, no one will ever live here. This neighborhood's dangerous. No, who wants to live here? But it's like until you make that first step and you say people will live here, super close to the loop. And Pilsen's getting too expensive. That's when you start getting people to those communities. There's this great website called Cityscape Chicago. The guy that started it, Stephen Vance, did this really amazing original research I'm going to cite now. He did a study, and he realized that of these 32,000 vacant lots, there are almost 2,500 that are both vacant, privately owned, in residential districts, and within a quarter-mile walk of the CTA. That represents 2,500 possibilities, roughly. The exact number is 2,206. The city has started to try to figure out ways to utilize these vacant lots. They've created the controversial and very slow-moving large lots program where they will offload these lots to people for $1. It hasn't been met with a ton of success. In 2021, they put together a Christmas sale for vacant properties. And the cool thing about what Chicago is doing is that they're predominantly trying to target community groups and residents that already live in close proximity to these vacant lots. They offer these lots for free and for $1, and they prioritize people who already live in those neighborhoods and are already doing great work in those communities. Now, it doesn't actually cost you $1 to get a vacant lot in Chicago. The real cost for people that go through the Cook County Land Bank Authority program is $4,155, which is still a steal for Chicago real estate, y'all. If you ain't investing in our south and west sides, you should be. Which brings me to my second to last point, which is the Invest Southwest program. Now, y'all have a lot of opinions about Lori Lightfoot. I'm not here to defend her or anything, but I think the most amazing thing that she's spearheaded is called Invest Southwest. And it is a huge investment program led by the city, partnering with private developers and other ventures to build back our south and west sides. And it is overdue. Chicago should have done it in 1968. But here we are in 2022, trucking along. 49% of the city-owned lots are in the Southwest, Invest Southwest program area. So it's incredible. You should all look up this program, Invest Southwest. A lot of the projects that have been proposed are in the point where they're starting to get approved, where they're starting to become real, where they're starting to go out to bid for contractors. And these projects are going to help get that first step for a lot of our south and west side neighborhoods that have seen the most demolition. $750 million was invested by the city of Chicago, most of it matched by private developers. It is a fantastic program. It is the silverest of silver. It is the gold lining on today's talk, which is that we recognize our history and we are doing our best to try to build back, to build things again. So here's a wrap up. This talk has been pretty heavy. I've tried to be as dorky as possible about it to keep it from being downright depressing. Hopefully you're all drunk, be it home or here. But it's important to give ourselves the tiniest bit of leeway because we're new to this. Our country has been around since 1776. Switzerland's been hanging out since 1400. We are growing, we are experimenting. We built a country like nobody else's, and we are doing it our own way, the same way a teenager's like, fuck you, mom, I'm gonna do it my way. We're figuring it out. We've made mistakes. We are fortunate enough to have started studying those mistakes and trying to make improvements. Was urban renewal a success? In some ways, again, having universities and colleges downtown helps keep our city vibrant, young, creative, and there's a lot of economic incentives to being near a college or a university. I wish they paid taxes. Having highways in our urban core, not a great idea. We tried that, it did not work. We ended up with cities like Houston. We also proved definitively with tons of peer-reviewed research that being racist and classist does not improve our cities. We are slowly and carefully righting our wrongs, studying, carefully redesigning our cities to make them better, more equitable, to produce less pollution, to save what we can't save, and to make people happier. Now I want to end on a little bit of recent history that's very personal to me in my community. On the 21st, Tuesday, the brewery I spent a lot of time at, Twisted Hippo, burned down. It burned down because of a fire that started in a slumlord-owned property, apartment building behind it. The fire spread to the brewery, where there's a bunch of gas to explode. This business means a lot to me because they donate their space, their time, their beer, their money to my community, to Albany Park. Before they even opened, they gave us their entire brewery space to host the first ever arts festival in Albany Park. I've met the owners. They're the nicest people. They live in Albany Park. It is a women-owned business. They make great beer, and it has burned down. Now, don't feel too bad for them. Their GoFundMe was funded in like 2 seconds. And I do believe they will rebuild. But demolition still happens in Chicago, and it's not always something we can control. We couldn't prevent Twisted Hippo from burning down with landmarking laws. It's very difficult to extract housing from the claws of slumlords. But at the very least, we can reclaim the brick. And we're trying to. So cross your fingers for me. I hope it works out. But there's a chance that the raw materials of this building built in the 1920s will still get a chance to go on and be part of new developments and new stories. So we can't save the building. Let's save the stuff. Thank you for coming to my talk. Also, as the resident brick expert here, you should all know you will save in Chicago a shitload of money if you put brick on the outside of your building, because it is a great insulator, and shiplap siding might be cute, but it's going to go out of style, and brick is forever, bitches. That's all I have to talk about. I will take some questions for a period of time. Shout out to, before I begin, I just want to say our organization is entirely volunteer run. I am a volunteer. Stephanie, who answers the door for you, is a volunteer. Olivia, who is typically here, is a volunteer. Our board of directors are volunteers. We are entirely women run too, if you care about that. And nobody in our organization is over the age of 65 or boring. So we depend on your support. If you have, I saw some of you falling asleep. It's fine. I'm not being ageist. I'm just saying make room for young people in the history field. Please, if you can, donate some money. The only reason we're able to talk about topics like this is because we keep it free, so nobody can ever demand a refund. No, but truly, if you had a good time, please donate to our organization, chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate. All of that money goes right back into programming. It doesn't pay anybody's salary yet. Someday, a girl can dream. But you can know by donating to small and local nonprofits in your community. Nobody's getting paid a fair wage. Everybody works too many hours. If you have to donate money, which you all should, please donate to the most local, most scrappy, most goofy nonprofit that you can find. It doesn't have to be ours, but American Red Cross has plenty of money. Shop local, donate local, do what you can. And if you can't do anything, be a good neighbor. Okay, I'll take some questions. Questions?
I was just thinking, so when you were at the end, when you were talking about the brick that's going to be salvaged.
Let's hope.
Right, let's hope. Were you referring to the apartment building in the back?
Both.
They said,
Both.
oh, the Twisted Hippo also?
The Twisted Hippo building was built in the 20s, so was the apartment building run by a slumlord behind it.
Right.
Both built in the 20s, both mostly Chicago common brick. Every old school brick building is built with, I get to talk about it after all, 2 wides. So a brick wall, old school brick wall, is 2 layers of brick. The outside brick is real grimy because cars didn't have like emission requirements until like yesterday, right? That part of the brick's usually pretty gross. That inside course, white. Oh my God, you guys are becoming brick experts. Perfectly clean, untouched, usually protected by drywall. So any building usually built before, I don't know, 1940 or so, has the exterior layer of brick, all those great Chicago Commons, and then that interior layer, which is just pristine, baby. You can put that on your fireplace in Barrington. I don't know if that answered your question, but also, yeah.
So that's cool.
Also, I tell people all the time to repeat the question, and I didn't do it, so I'll do it now. The question was, is it both the Twisted Hippo building and also the apartment building? The answer is yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Where are these abandoned brick factories and how illegal is it to go inside?
The question was, where are the abandoned brick factories and how illegal is it to go inside? Ask me later. I can give you a list. No, most of the brick factories, since they were shut down in the 70s, have since been redeveloped. I kind of talked briefly about the pattern: mine the clay, fill the pit in with trash, resell it, build something else on it. So most of those brick factories, because they went out of business so long ago, are now nowhere to be found. They are apartments, they are condos. Just look for big chunks of modern apartment buildings, usually built with black brick. I'm over it. I'm so sorry. Don't paint brick. Okay. Ask me later, please. I can't. I've had 3 cocktails. Everything's fine. You can't really find those brick factories here in Chicago anymore. They no longer exist. But I've got a great one in Streeter, Illinois I can point you to. Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about the demolition of transit options, specifically like stations? Because there have been a lot of stations in Chicago that have been demolished.
So the question was, can you talk about transit stations being demolished? So the issue is, around the same time that you have massive white flight, massive post-World War II movement to the suburbs, you have a significant decline in ridership of the CTA. So the way that the CTA responded is by cutting service. I mean, they were hemorrhaging money. In some ways, you can't blame them. The stations they chose to close, you can blame them for. They also instituted across a lot of the transit lines skip-stop patterns. So, you know, they'd skip this station, stop at this one. AB patterns, things like that. And basically, the transit stations that they felt were receiving the least amount of ridership, I don't know how accurate it is because it's super frickin' convenient that all the ones marked for least amount of ridership were on the south and west sides. They would eventually shutter those stations. In some cases, they actually demolished the station. In other examples, they didn't demolish the station and it's just a ghost station. The CTA has been making a concentrated effort to try to reopen a lot of those stations. On the green and pink lines, Morgan is a good example, a recent example. If you too were a college kid 10 years ago stealing CTA maps, you probably have one that lists stations that weren't there before. The CTA is slow moving, but give it up for the Chicago Transit Authority because as opposed to DC, New York off the top of my head, the CTA has a great policy of modernizing stations, and they're just constantly doing construction. It's super annoying as a CTA writer, but also I don't have rats dragging whole ass pizzas down the stairs in my transit stations, except maybe a clerk in division. But you know, and I still don't totally agree with the way that CTA chooses to spend their money. This is me personally, not my organization speaking. But you know, they built a $1 billion flyover to save Brown Line commuters like myself 4 minutes, where they still do not extend the red line all the way to the city limits on the south side, but it goes to the suburbs on the north and the west side. So I don't always agree with the decisions. It's happening about as fast as Uptown Theater's been redeveloped. That was a deep cut. Thanks for laughing. I don't always disagree with the choices that CTA makes, but I really respect the hell out of them for consistently reopening stations, for trying to make improvements, and for keeping our transit system from completely crumbling into the ground or large chunks of concrete falling from the ceiling. DC. I hope that answered your question.
Grand Central's not coming back though, right?
No. Also, ask me later about the bazillion dollars that went into the substation underneath the loop that was going to go straight to O'Hare from the loop on the same Blue Line tracks. So you'd be on an express train behind a Blue Line train. It is abandoned. Anyway, other questions? Yes, you, sir.
Me, thank you. First time here. Do you know of any neighborhoods that were pro-urban renewal? Like
There were lots of, yes.
Because like my mom grew up in Uptown in the 1970s when they built Truman College. That was like the worst part of Truman, or the worst part of Uptown. It was like you didn't want to walk there past during the day. And like I know by UIC, like in Little Italy, after their neighborhood got half knocked down and the university got built, their property values skyrocketed. So
Right.
were there people that were supporting
Right.
getting rid of the worst parts of the neighborhood to save the neighborhood as a whole?
Right. So the question is, were there people in support of urban renewal? There were a lot of people in support of urban renewal, mostly white people. In Uptown, which was specifically mentioned by our asker, Anthony. In Uptown, there were things like I think the abbreviation is the UCC, Uptown Community something. It was a group of business owners in Uptown that were very pro-urban renewal, and they were actually at odds with this organization called JOIN, Jobs or Income Now, run by my personal hero and 20th century girlfriend, Peggy Terry. Excellent. You should read literally every single thing you can find about Peggy Terry. Anyway, Peggy Terry was a poor white woman from the Appalachian South who became a community organizer kind of by accident. And she was running organizations teaching mothers how to apply for welfare and overall really helping the people that were struggling the most in Uptown. And like JOIN, Jobs or Income Now, was like butting heads at the time with the Uptown Chicago Commission or whatever it was, which again was mostly white male business owners. I found a picture of them in the 70s Tribune, and it's literally 8 white guys. So there were people in every neighborhood that were very pro-urban renewal. Urban renewal sounded great on paper, so there were tons of people who were just ignorant of all the nuance, who were also very pro-urban renewal, because when you drive by a bunch of buildings that look like shit, you want them to become something better too. And so the way urban renewal was sold to people was, we're going to make your city better and more vibrant, and it's going to be amazing, and we're going to get rid of all these horrible substandard housing, and we're going to replace it with something else. But yeah, everything sounds great on paper. Urban planners' ideas always sound great on paper. Sorry, urban planners. Again, I have a lot of respect for you.
We've changed since back then. We're still shitty though.
You're still mostly women, sorry.
Yes,
ma'am, your question.
How do you factor like NIMBYism and YIMBYism into
Oh.
the demolition conversation?
Okay, so the question was, how do you factor NIMBYism and YIMBYism into demolition conversations? For those who may not be super clued into urban planning lingo, NIMBY stands for no in my backyard. YIMBY stands for yes in my backyard. It's a functional 21st century acronym. Acronym to describe
Get
people.
another cocktail, please.
NIMBYs. It's a shorthand to describe people who don't want any development to happen in their neighborhood, NIMBYs, and people who want every kind of development to happen in their neighborhood, YIMBYs. Remember when I said at the beginning that demolition isn't always bad, but it's always controversial? That's because NIMBYs and YIMBYs have been around forever. We just haven't had those convenient acronyms for them before. There have always been people pro-development. There have always been people anti-development. There's a number of reasons to be anti-development, whether you just have the biggest hard-on for historic preservation, whether you are a homeowner and you think the new project will affect your property values. Let's say you're a homeowner who's like, affordable housing will ruin my neighborhood. I mean, fuck you, but there are those people. There are people that say no because they think the traffic's going to get worse. There's a million reasons why somebody in a community may not want a project to happen. And there's a million reasons to be pro-development. There are people who work for developers, so obviously they're pro-development. There are people who are homeowners that want their property values to go up, and they see a new development project as something that's going to affect their property values. So they're like, yeah, let's build it. There are a million reasons to be for development and for demolition. There are a million reasons to be against it. Like I said, it's not black and white, it's gray. Hop on literally any Facebook page for any neighborhood in the city of Chicago, and you will see people screaming at each other over Facebook about how this project is gentrification and this project is a godsend to the neighborhood, and there will always be people in both camps, and there always have been. And it depends on the project. It's impossible to put like a blanket statement on like every project's great or every project's shit. Affordable housing projects are literally always great. Every other project, and if you want to fight me, I will. Everything else is up for debate. Even historic preservation and high-level buildings. Yes, John Finley.
Patty, I have a question about demolition.
Yes.
I want to ask about implosion
Oh.
and wrecking balls and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I work in the construction industry, John Finley. I do not know much about implosions and wrecking balls. That was the question. I will say I've watched a lot of YouTube videos of buildings getting destroyed, and it's always cool. And I can tell you one fact to distract you from the fact that I don't really understand or am able to respond to the question by telling you about bricks again.
Okay.
So the wrecking ball or demolition process typically results in a loss of about 20 to 30% of the building material, which is unable to be reclaimed. And that's because it's literally where the wrecking ball hits. Or, the thing with Chicago Common Brick in particular is that it was made before the development of the American Standards of ASTM.
That's it.
The ASTM standards, which basically say, look, if you're going to make a brick, it has to be this good, at least. Those didn't come around until 40s. I just sent a link to somebody just the other day about when this started. But the ASTM, before the ASTM, you can make a brick of whatever shit you wanted. You put some horsehair in there, it didn't matter. You can put a dead Irish immigrant in there, mix it in, who cares? Sorry, I'm so sorry. That's a dark joke, but that is how the item canal was built. You can do whatever you want. You can put whatever you wanted in there. So Chicago Common Brick are incredibly variable. For instance, my company won't reclaim brick if it's too crumbly. The owner of my company calls these Cheeto brick. So 20 to 30% of brick, roughly, is lost in a building's demolition. I would assume it's similar for some of the other stuff there. And then others are lost during mortar removal. Old school mortar was very soft. Mortar should always be soft. Mortar should always be soft. Ask me about tuck pointing, for the love of God. Or contact the Chicago Builders Association. Soft mortar, you can literally hit off a Chicago Common Brick with like a gentle boop, and it comes off. Hard mortar made of Portland cement, which all of you like to stick between your fucking buildings, does not come off a brick so good. So some bricks are lost during mortar removal because they're made of Cheetos.
Online question.
Yeah, online question.
Our friend Walter wants to know, comments on demolition via gentrification. We're losing affordable 2-flats at a rapid rate.
Okay, so the comment from, I'm assuming Walter Kiefer, our speaker who kicked off this series with aviation in Chicago, fantastic gentleman, asked about gentrification, deconversion of 2-flats. So, look, we have an affordable housing crisis right now. We've had an affordable housing crisis, I'm pretty sure, since World War I. We do not have enough housing, let alone enough housing for people that work at Subway. So, I am patently opposed to any project that reduces the number of housing units we have in our city. If you are taking a 2-flat, a 3-flat, or I'm not even kidding you, a 6-flat, and deconverting it into a single-family home, you've taken a property that could previously house multiple families of 2 to 5 people each. And you've taken that entire property and you've deconverted it into a place where one very wealthy family lives. You are decreasing density in a city that desperately needs density. And the worst part about a 2-flat deconversion or a 3-flat deconversion is that you do not need typically any building permits to do it because it's already zoned residential and it is not visible from the outside. So you typically can purchase a 2-flat or a 3-flat and deconvert it into a single family home with absolutely no review by a zoning committee or your alderman or anything, which is why it happens a lot, predominantly in wealthier neighborhoods. And it's actually the point of most concern for most people interested in affordable housing and these types of topics, because not only does it represent loss of available units, it also, God, it's just bad. I had a really good thought about it. It's terrible. It's bad. Just buy a vacant lot in North Lawndale and build your luxury single family home. Honestly, it's cheaper. Yeah, it's happening all over. It's super sad. Okay, so the other reason it's terrible that I remember just now, I've had 3 cocktails, is that it's decreasing the availability of small landlords. So traditionally in Chicago, you build a 2-flat because you are too poor to build a single family home. You are an immigrant. It's 1880. You're from Ireland or Germany or some shit. You build a 2-flat on the front of the lot and you build a 3-flat on the back of the lot because you also live in Pilsen probably. So not only are you maximizing the amount of housing that can be built on one city lot, back houses, front houses, very common throughout the city. You build a starter home, which is typically, multiple units, and you live on the top floor and you rent out floor number 2 and floor number 1 to typically other immigrants, typically other people that remind you of the home country and also can't afford a lot of rent, and you cut them nice deals and you guys all cook together and you have this beautiful little community. When we lose that, we lose upward mobility, because a lot of those people would then, they'd build that 2-flat, they'd rent out that floor, that would offset the cost of owning the building. Over time, that family would save up enough money to move to the American dream, the Chicago bungalow, or a suburban house, whatever. And then you sell that 2-flat to another immigrant family that's going to do the same thing. How many people here rent? Holy shit, what up, renters? Whoa. Are you 2 transients? Just kidding. I love when people call renters transient people. I've lived in my apartment for 7 years. And my landlord is my bestie. So, small-time landlords, how do you guys love them? So much. Small-time landlords work with you when you can't afford rent. Small-time landlords let you borrow their drills. Small-time landlords are like, you can use my grill anytime you want, Stephanie. Small-time landlords are making their own American dream, and they work with you and they live with you and they share the same building as you and they share the same parking space as you, and they are wonderful frickin' people to rent from as a renter and as a landlord. You know exactly what someone's doing to your building because you're there. You know if they're smoking inside because you can smell it. Like, you know they have 8 dogs so you can hear it. Small-time landlords is the best way to have a landlord-renter relationship. And the more 2-flats we can deconvert into single-family homes, the fewer small-time landlords we have, the more property management companies we have. How many people have rented from a property management company? How bad does that fucking suck? They don't care about you. They don't live in the building. They don't fix stuff when it breaks. They don't give a flying hell because they're just trying to profit off of you. So this has been an incredibly long-winded way to say that losing 2-flat housing stock and losing 3-flat housing stock also contributes to horrible experiences for renters because their landlords don't live in their building. Their landlords are not people. Their landlords are faceless corporations. Bring back small-time landlords. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. My landlord owns like 5 properties, and he texts me, he's like, I hope you never leave. Love you, Tom. Shout out. You, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the destruction of buildings, maybe in like the downtown core into turning into parking lots than what they're doing to get rid of them.
Hi, Allison, I love you. Okay, the question was,
Or at least build over them.
tearing down buildings in the downtown core and turning them into parking lots?
Paving paradise.
Paving paradise and putting up a parking lot.
Yeah. And of what they're doing to mitigate that now because of renewal costs.
Yeah, it was very popular at a period of time in Chicago to tear down buildings and build parking lots. In the downtown core of Chicago, I would say it was not super common. There are clear examples like Block 37, very famously a block of a bunch of dense 1800s buildings, maybe early 1900s, torn down, leveled. People said they were going to build something crazy on it. They never did. It was a parking lot for decades, and then eventually became a mall, which it still is today. It did happen in Chicago. The downtown core in Chicago, you didn't see as much of that. You did see a lot of that in neighborhoods in Chicago. I consider the downtown core to be the loop. Out in the neighborhoods, you see a lot of strip malls built. So Albany Park being the example I come back to because that's where I live. You saw a lot of 1920s buildings that had apartments up top and ground level retail be torn down and built a parking lot with 1-story retail on the perimeter. You see that a lot along Lawrence Avenue, along a lot of the major corridors in Chicago. That was the main thing that we did. It's like you tear down a building that had housing above and retail below, and you build parking with retail, which again, you lose housing. That's the more common thing I feel like we see here in neighborhood fabric. It's already 9 p.m., but if you guys want to hang out, I'll keep answering questions. I'll answer like 3 more, and then the rest I'll answer privately. You, sir.
Yeah. You know, one thing that sucks about living here is I feel like my heart is ripped out every day.
Yeah.
You know, like there's that Beaux Arts bank that was just torn down at Clark and Belmont.
To build a new bank.
Oh my God! It just I can't even walk past it anymore. It's like, but it seems like the 90-day demolition delay thing is not doing anything. It seems like developers can just do whatever they want. Is there anything happening to like stop people from destroying our city? And I'm okay with vasotomies. I'm like pro vasotomy.
Right. So
compromise.
The question is, it's depressing to live in Chicago because people always be tearing shit down. Remember when I said demolition fucks with people? Thank you for being my case study.
Yes, totally.
The 90-day demolition delay doesn't really seem to be stopping demolitions. Is anything being done? And an example given was at Clark and Belmont.
Yeah, I don't even know if
Clark
that was
and Belmont.
on that.
No. I think about it a lot.
Ripped my heart out.
I drive here every day. No, every Thursday. So a good example of this is at Clark and Belmont, there was a 1920s bank building that was recently torn down so they can build a new exact replica, but 2021. So dumb. Yeah, so the issue is that it's not in a protected area. It's not in a protected district. It wasn't deemed historically significant by any landmarking commission. So yeah, you're powerless. If demolition in your community bothers you a lot, if the idea of demolishing a building that's currently vacant bothers you a lot, do what you can to landmark it. Do what you can to pressure your aldermen. Aldermen in Chicago have so much power. Yeah. It's almost a problem. It's great though if you have a socialist alderman. Shout out Rosanna. So Chicago aldermen have a ton of power. So if the idea of demolition bothers you in your neighborhood, reach out to your alderman and be that guy.
Yeah, something sucks.
Be that guy.
Hey, he let it happen. And sorry.
So ultimately, be a pain in your. The loudest voice is the voice that speaks up. And the thing that infuriates me a lot of times is that there's so many critics on Facebook, and there are no fucking critics emailing your frickin' alderman. The people that email the alderman are 65-year-old ladies with nothing better to do. Don't let that be the only voice in the room. If the only thing your alderman hears is tear it down and build me something that's going to increase my property values, that's the only voice they hear. If you care about this stuff, email your alderman an incredibly passionate and overly long email about how much you care, because the more of you that reach out to your local organizations and say, please pay attention to me, the more people that will pay attention to you. The only way to be heard is to speak up on a forum that's not Facebook. So if you care, speak out, get your friends to speak out, start GoFundMes and advocacy pages. They hate that. So, I mean, be super vocal. All you can do is be a community leader. That is the best thing you can do to protect buildings in your community. And if you think the building that you want to protect is important enough, put in the labor. I mean, historic preservationists and nonprofit organizations, again, are making no money and have no power and are incredibly overworked. So do the work for them. Find out how to write a national register nomination and do it. You can do it. I started a nonprofit and I don't know anything. So truly, you can do it. And if you care enough, put the labor in. Put the labor in and you can do an amazing things. But if you sit at home and you cry about a building, it won't do anything. Thank you. Applaud, applause. I said I'd take 2 more questions. Yes, Stephanie.
Did the New Deal money that came in have anything to do with the death of Anton Cermak and FDR's attempted assassination?
Did the New Deal money that came in have anything to do with FDR's attempted assassination and Anton Cermak's taking the bullet for FDR? Shout out Anton Cermak! Saved my favorite president with polio. Get vaccinated. I have no idea. Probably FDR was feeling quite rosy about Chicago. Thank you, Anton Cermak. Thank you. Ultimately, though, one person, no matter how powerful, is not as important as literally a bazillion new voters. So the Democratic machine, I would say, probably tilted it in a favor that it was already leaning. Other online questions?
That's it.
Okay. Sid.
Let's end on a positive note.
Okay.
You talked a lot about like the things that are going on like the south side and the west side. Any projects that you feel are really promising?
Do I feel there are any promising projects being proposed for the south and west sides through Invest Southwest or otherwise? I personally, because I have a required employment-related interest in following development news, have seen most of the projects come through. There's not a single one I don't like. I think they're all great. I mean, the contemporary mode of urban planning we've kind of realized works best is to not just, shout out to Elsa's lecture on public housing, not just to build an isolated island full of housing for poor people. That doesn't work. Try that. Got Cabrini Green. The model we're adopting now is mixed income, mixed use. So offering housing at market rate, offering housing that's subsidized, offering housing that's maybe fully subsidized by the city of Chicago depending on your specific voucher, mixed with businesses, rental space for small businesses, paired with business incubator hubs. Every single project I have seen proposed for the Invest Southwest project has been a mix of mixed income housing, cultural amenities like theaters, cultural amenities like bowling alleys, whatever, like places you can hang out, places you might travel to even if you live in the north side. Y'all gotta get to the south side. And so a mix of housing, cultural amenities, and space for businesses. And that's kind of the model of urban planning we're seeing more often now. So there's not a project I specifically want to call out because I've liked all of them. I thought all of them show promise. I don't know if this is going to work. Ask me in 30 years. But I think when you read Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, you read her words about the sidewalk ballet and that the most healthy neighborhood is one that has destination businesses, places you will travel to go to, that has housing, different kinds of housing. I always point to the example of you need rich people in your neighborhood because who's going to sit on the board of your PTA? And the kids that benefit from a PTA is all of them, but the parents that work 6 jobs don't have time to be on a PTA. So you need mixed income. You need businesses. You need destination businesses and businesses that serve your community. Nobody's traveling from Lincoln Park to Albany Park to go to the dry cleaners, but they are traveling to Albany Park because noodle kebab doesn't exist in Lincoln Park. You need a mix of all these things, and all the projects I've seen proposed are a mix of things, which I think is good. And what I hope is that these foundational cornerstones that are built attract and retain small businesses, because it's also really tough to be a small business right now. So if you are not already spending money on small businesses, spend money on small businesses. And with that, I conclude. You can just come up and ask me questions now if you're here in person. And if you leave comments on the Chicago for Chicagoans Facebook page or Instagram, or you email, literally any email you find on our website, it comes to me. So feel free to reach out.